Press club or bias all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and we're going to be spending some time today talking about how you're violating me with your different opinions. Or at least that's the message I'm getting from a couple of the stories that we're going to be covering in the course of today's show. Now, I want to make clear from the very beginning, my goal is not to get you angry. It's not to bring more fear, more anger, or a stronger drive to be enemy-driven in your thinking. No, but I do want to point out where there's a very curious double standard, at least on the part of much of the legacy media when it comes to such matters. And the first thing we're going to start out with is a story of libraries and appropriate versus inappropriate material for kids. And what does it mean when parents, or for that matter, members of the community speak up and say, I'm not good with some of the material that you're making available to kids? Well, this headline will speak volumes about what that looks like. North Idaho Library Director resigns over intimidation and political atmosphere of extremism. Okay, this must be pretty serious because we have actually crossed into the realm where now we are dealing with meteorological implications. There's an atmosphere of hate, a climate of fear, or something of that line. Since there's a lot of climate angst to be found in society, I guess maybe this is a good metaphor to run with. But I want you to see some of the different justifications that this North Idaho Library Director is offering as to why she's stepping down from her job. And then I'm just going to suggest this now, but is it possible that someone is hollering without actually having been hurt? Let's take a look at the story. After a petition started last month to recall 4 Boundary County Library board members over what they're calling a routine policy update, Library Director Kimber Glidden has announced her resignation effective September 10th. Now, she says, nothing in my background could have prepared me for the political atmosphere of extremism, militant Christian fundamentalism, intimidation tactics, and threatening behavior currently being employed in the community, Glidden wrote in her announcement posted by the library in Bonners Ferry. I mean, that's some pretty heavy charges there. That sounds like, good heavens, what were they doing? What were these people doing to show this extremism, this Christian fundamentalism, the militant Christian fundamentalism, intimidation tactics? Well, she gets into this a little bit further on in the article, but let's dig a little bit deeper. Idaho Press reports that a push by a few parents to ban books with LGBTQ themes started early this year and has snowballed from there, Library board member Lee Colson said. Now, I'm going to call into question ban books because we all know that the banning and the book burning, why, of course, that's the kind of thing that Adolf Hitler himself would have done. So there we go. Godwin's law has already been invoked. But is that really what the goal is of these people who are speaking up about, in particular, LGBTQ-themed books in public libraries? Widespread efforts to ban books and censor libraries are cropping up by groups across the Northwest and the nation, like an attempt to ban materials on gender studies from Meade School District's libraries in a Spokane suburb, another librarian quitting over armed intimidation in Coeur d'Alene, and Idaho House Bill 666, introduced earlier this year, by the way, I don't think that one passed, which could have held libraries liable for checking out materials that could be considered harmful to children. So the concern here is that people are expressing concern over certain materials, and I guess the accusation is, well, they just want to ban it all. They want to choose for everybody else what's acceptable and what isn't. I'm just going to ask this, does that not work both ways? The people who are promoting these kinds of books and these kinds of materials, are they not suggesting that this is what's best for everyone involved? Because it seems like there's got to be some give and take here. In Boundary County, a local group is attempting to recall 4 of 5 library board members, including Colson, after the board approved an updated collection development and maintenance policy. Now, the new policy says selection of materials will not be affected by any such potential disapproval, and the Boundary County Library will not place materials on closed shelves or label items to protect the public from their comment. I tried to think of a slightly easier way to say that, and the only thing I could come up with, it wasn't very diplomatic, it was, we'll do what we damn well please. Not exactly what I expect from people who are running on taxpayer money, but if that's what works for them, I guess they'll go with what they're going to try to go with. Nancy Pearl, former executive director of the Washington Center for the Book at Seattle Public Library, was not familiar with the case in Boundary County, but said these kinds of protests demonstrate a lack of understanding about the function of public libraries, which should be places for everyone with books on all sides of an issue. Now, again, public libraries. I'm going to assume that when we say public library, we are talking about a library that is funded with taxpayer funds. That's what makes it public. Does it not seem fitting, though, that the public should have some kind of input as to, and I mean on the community level, what are we comfortable with making available to our kids? So I wouldn't expect a public library in a suburb of San Francisco to necessarily have the same standards as a public library in a suburb of Northern Idaho. And it's not because Northern Idaho is hopelessly racist and extremist and San Francisco is just so enlightened and, and so inclusive. There are just differing, how can I put this, standards, vibes. There's a different dynamic to each one of these communities. And I do like the idea that, yes, there really should be books on all sides of an issue. But there also has to be a matter of appropriateness when we talk about the age of kids who are, checking out these books. I mean, this one just pulls at the strings of your heart. Libraries are the heart of the community. And to see this happening is just heartbreaking. Now, Pearl is an author, book critic, and affectionately referred to as America's librarian. And she says, certainly parents have the right to decide what their children can read, but I don't think a parent or anyone has the right to tell somebody else what they can or can't read. And that's what's happening with these protests. Well, it seems like the library is definitely asserting that right to tell people what they can or can't read. I mean, for instance, I know there are books that question, for instance, gender identity or some of the gender orthodoxy that has come into fashion here in the last few years. Can we expect that these books would be represented, or are they, verboten because they don't fit, the ideological parameters that these librarians would support? I'm just wondering out loud. I don't know the answer for sure. Now, the Recall Group opposes the association because it advocates similar policies to protect against efforts to systematically exclude any kind of subject matter. And the group did not respond to our request for an interview. Good for them. They probably understood they're not going to be fairly represented, at least by, Idaho Press. It's funny, Glidden said on what finally caused her to resign, it wasn't a final straw so much as a constant barrage of the same rhetoric and people not listening to my answers, not doing what they're told. They don't want to hear the truth. You can almost imagine her. You can't handle the truth. Bah! No truth handler, you. I deride your truth handling skills. But if it's their community, maybe they have a legitimate reason to speak up. Now, the threats against her, Glidden says, have been veiled, but the message is clear, she said. And this is very interesting to me. During comments in public meetings, she has been warned with, are you sitting down? Someone to hold your hand? Fire and brimstone language of her imminent damnation coming from certain Christian fundamentalist groups who are known to believe they have a call to violence, she said. Look, I've seen people called out before, on religious grounds. Probably the most memorable one was a pastor who very quietly sat and watched as Drag Queen Story Hour was taking place. This was in California, I believe in Temecula, California. And at the end of the Drag Queen Story Hour presentation, someone asked, well, are there any questions? And his hand went up and he said, yeah, I've got a question. What are you going to do when God judges you for what you're doing and what you're teaching to these young children? And the look on the faces of those parents and on the faces of the performers, they just, it was absolute horror. And then they started shrieking and literally howling as they chased and, expelled this pastor from their library. So yeah, fire and brimstone language, I get it. Nobody really wants to be told when they're doing something that is wrong. But it's a fact that a lot of people believe teaching deviant ideas to kids is not a good thing. And for people who believe that, I don't know where this idea is, these fundamentalist groups that are known to believe they have a call to violence. Well, you want to quantify that? Where exactly does that call come from? Have we ever seen evidence of this before? Do you have any records of these groups that have been attending here being arrested for this call to violence? Or is this largely a figment of the imagination of a certain library official? Just asking, because it seems like a pretty broad thing to throw out there. It seems like it could use maybe a little bit of backing up, some quantification as far as what exactly does that mean, a call to violence. Now, some people have stood quietly, armed, with arms crossed in the back of board meetings. Look, I'm not a big fan of open carry, just from the standpoint of I support a person's right to be peacefully armed wherever they happen to be. Sometimes I think it brings attention that is not the best, and it's not supportive. So for that reason, I'm not one who goes around advocating, yes, you should show up open carrying. But it doesn't change the fact that a person can still be peacefully armed. And if they're standing there quietly, arms crossed, I'm sorry, what's the complaint? The fact that someone is exercising a right that maybe you don't agree with? Well, that's too bad, but they're still perfectly within their rights. Well, that just doesn't make anybody feel safe. Okay, others have signed up to become library volunteers, but show up armed and just want to have that show of force in the library. Again, put some skin on this for me and tell me, what exactly does that look like? Do they come in with an AR-15 slung around their neck, walking around with a rifle at the low ready, everywhere they go? Or is it somebody who just in the course of their day-to-day life is used to carrying, a personal protection firearm, either concealed or otherwise? Is that the show of force? Again, I understand there are differing points of view here. I'm just not buying the idea that all these people are showing up and they're waving guns around and threatening people. If that were the case, we'd probably be hearing about stories of this person or that person being arrested for what they're doing. And I don't think that that's quite the case. So I'm not doubting that this librarian is feeling picked on, but I also feel like there's some pretty serious exaggeration. And part of it comes from the ideological difference of, well, these people aren't on board. They're not woke. They're not on board with the idea that we have to embrace whatever comes out in the name of LGBTQ, blah, 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 blah. Not everybody's going to. And that doesn't mean that they're going to go get violent or that they're somehow, trying to control everybody around them. Maybe they're just emphatically saying, no, that's not for me. That's not for my kids, or I don't support this within my community. Now, Glidden reiterated the difference between what's happening here and the rest of the country is that our library does not have the titles that people are wanting to ban. She said this is a dangerous first because they're not hiding behind a veneer that it's about banning particular books. It's really about control. Boundary County is a warning, she says. It's not about the books. Okay, well, if that's the case, what exactly are they going to do when they get in control? See, that's the part I don't quite get. If this is really about control and about someone trying to control other people. Look, I'm not a fan of someone deciding what ideas or what books you and I should be allowed to consider for ourselves. Now, I'm talking about adults. But I do believe that communities in particular should be able to put stipulations forward that say, this is appropriate, this is not appropriate, given the age of the kids that may be accessing this. And I love to read. I love libraries. I have since I was a little kid. I was very blessed. My mom taught me how to read before I ever went to kindergarten. I was, not reading on like a college level, but I was a very avid reader and loved to go to the library because there was always that world of discovery. And that's something I would love to see continue. But it feels like there are people who are taking advantage of that and trying to use it to introduce subversive ideas to young minds in the name of, we're just trying to make them inclusive. We're trying to make them, more tolerant to the people around them. Realize you can teach that without indoctrinating them into, gay sex themes, which seems to be, the focal point of some of these books that are in question. Ultimately, you need to make the decision. But I just tire of seeing this portrayed as victims. Oh, look at these extremists and the religious fundamentalism, and everybody's trying to pick on us and they hate us. And I guess this probably describes it as well as can be. Just stop violating me with your different opinions. I'm sorry, but this is where we need to be grown-ups, and we can disagree. That's fine. But to sit there and to accuse the other side of, you're just trying to gin up violence and you're trying to make things, so difficult for us. I'm just going to have to quit. I'm just going to have to move away because this is all about, someone trying to impose their control on me. I get it. Nobody likes to be told no. And it's probably pretty tough on those parents and others who are willing to draw a line and say, that's inappropriate. We ought not do that. Look at what has happened to other parents, though, around the country. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It was just a few months ago. The parents attending school board meetings in Loudoun County, Georgia, had the Department of Justice breathing down their necks as if they were domestic terrorists because they were speaking out against some of the stuff that was being introduced to their kids against the will of the parents. Okay, somewhere somebody's got to take the initiative and say, look, these are my kids. And sometimes that means they're going to disagree with what even the best-intentioned librarians and others may have in mind. But this whole ideological purity thing, wow, that seems like a lot of trouble. It seems like a solution in search of a problem. So forgive me if I don't buy into the idea that this is really the most dangerous thing that's happening and that somehow these people need to stop showing up and stop voicing their concerns. If their behavior is peaceful, again, I don't care if they're armed or not. We do live in a society where the right to keep and bear arms is recognized as a fundamental, inalienable right. I get it. Not everybody likes that. I may not choose to exercise my right to keep and bear arms the way that some people do. Let's stop pretending that, it's some kind of an attack and they just came out and they were just trying to make me feel bad and they told me no. As an adult, you have to hear that word from time to time. Hey, speaking of they told me no, check out this headline. Boise cancels Ammon Bundy park event. Now, this one kind of gets me wondering just because I know Ammon Bundy is a lightning rod for people in Idaho. And by the way, that's for people on the conservative side, too. He has his critics on the conservative side, as well as statists of Republican and Democrat flavor who really don't like the fact that this guy stands up and is impossible to intimidate when it comes to standing up for freedom. But I want you to check out this story, and I got to tip my hat. I think Brian Hughes actually does a pretty good job of not being too smarmy when he talks about why this was canceled. Listen to some of the justification that was given for why the city of Boise, particularly the mayor of Boise, chose to cancel a rally scheduled for next month.
Ammon Bundy for governor campaign has been on the road a lot this summer, from parades to town halls to county fairs. But Mr. Bundy won't be stopping by the Boise bench next month for a planned rally in the Treasure Valley, as he calls it. This morning, the city of Boise announcing they pulled a plug on that party plan for Cassia Park. Why? Well, Mayor Laura McClain put it this way. Bundy and his associates have made a habit of harassing city employees, personally targeting doctors and threatening judges and so many others in our community, and consistently disregard established ways of ensuring public safety, adding, the people of Boise have had enough of his threats and intimidation. But there was also a technical reason for the rejection. I believe Mr. Bundy intentionally misrepresented the event on the reservation to skirt the special events process and requirements we have in place. Misrepresented the event? Well, you may be asking, how does one do that? Well, two things. First, his name, Ammon Bundy's name, was nowhere near the paperwork to reserve the park for the event. It was filed by Sarah Clendenin, a real estate agent and the executive director of Health Freedom Idaho. She's also a Constitution Party candidate for the Idaho Senate District 15, which is in West Boise. And if you take a closer look to the part with the question there at the bottom, do you plan to have an inflatable structure, like a bounce house, something like that? Well, she answered no, which seems to contradict Ammon's promotion of the event on social media just 2 days ago. See, it says there will be incredible speakers, live music, food trucks, face painting, and, well, a bounce house. So why is that a big deal? Well, the city requires special permits for things like food trucks and bounce houses and live music and large crowds where you might have to account for like a security and even additional bathrooms. Those are considered special events and would require going through the city's special events approval process. On the form, Sarah estimates, well, about 50 people would be showing up, which would be fine for a birthday party or a small family reunion, according to Boise Parks and Recreation. But if there's a possibility this could draw a few more than that, well, the city wasn't willing to take that chance. Oh, and one other thing, probably the biggest thing. Cassia Park isn't one of the Boise parks that can be reserved for such an event. There are only 10 parks in the city that can accommodate such gatherings. Parks like Ann Morrison, Julia Davis, Cherie Buckner Webb, those kind, not Cassia Park. We did reach out to the Bundy campaign to get their reaction to this rejection, find out if they got their $150 back, and we did just get a statement a few minutes ago. So this is what Ammon Bundy had to say in his statement about this rejection. Well, it goes like this. We're going to skip to the second paragraph. Mayor McLean's 2022 Boise has become no better than Birmingham City in the 60s, where Martin Luther King Jr. was discriminated against for organizing peaceful rallies to bring awareness to government abuse and injustice, he says. Men becoming women is more probable than my political agenda aligning with Mayor McLean's liberal woke utopia. But does this mean that mayors should use their power to restrict free speech in cities? And if so, then where should I hold my campaign events? He went on to say, if I was a gay Democrat, would Mayor McLean's Jim Crow-type philosophy affect my ability to hold an event in Boise? I thought these questions were settled more than 60 years ago, he says. So much for Mayor McLean being a tolerant progressive, he said. Oh, by the way, yes, they did get their $150 back.
Oh, well, then I guess everything is all right and proper because, as you can see, they had plenty of, undotted I's to which they could refer, or T's which were not perfectly perpendicularly crossed. I'm sorry, but with bureaucracy, there's always something. There's always some little hidden rule. Well, if you'd asked for it this way and held your nose, to this side, well, then of course we could have accommodated you, but we didn't do that. But I want you to take a closer look at what the mayor says, and then tell me that, no, this is more like an ideological kind of punishment. This is, Boise Mayor Lauren McLean released an emailed statement explaining her rationale behind the canceled reservation for, here it is, far-right activist and gubernatorial candidate Ammon Bundy. It's so funny. I don't know if this is just a memo that goes out to everybody in Idaho media. I was actually listening to conservative, talk radio earlier today and heard someone reading the top of the hour news or, the local news, and whatever wire service they responded to. It wasn't just Ammon Bundy. It was far-right anti-government activist Ammon Bundy. I mean, he's going to have to legally change his name at some point because that's the only way that people within the press will refer to him. So there's your first clue that we have a little ideological factor at work here. Do you ever hear anyone refer to, far left activists or, far left anti-family or anti-religion extremism? Probably not. Upon discovering that this park reservation was made under a different name, the city canceled that reservation. McLean's statement reads, I believe Mr. Bundy, okay, we can't prove, but I believe Mr. Bundy intentionally misrepresented the event on the reservation to skirt the special events process and requirements we have in place. Yes, requirements which are perfect for, keeping undesirables, uppity, political candidates and other people who are a little too attached to freedom from, getting out of control. The statement goes on to say, and this is the part I want you to pay attention to because here is the real justification. Bundy and his associates have made a habit of harassing city employees, personally targeting doctors, and threatening judges, and so many others in our community. Okay, stop for just a second. Talk to me about what that means. When you say harassing city employees, which city employees? What exactly constitutes the harassment? I don't doubt that he has made some noise and he has made some people uncomfortable by calling attention to things they were doing. Whether it was shutting down people's businesses, whether it was taking people's children on some cooked up pretext of, we think your boy is starving. But by gosh, he got that kid returned to his parents now, didn't he? So personally targeting doctors, threatening judges and so forth, this in no way explains what was going on behind the scenes that would focus that kind of attention. And it doesn't really do justice to what exactly does it mean, personally targeting. Like naming their names? Like having people show up and protest outside their homes? I mean, we're using some very heavy language here. targeting, harassing, threatening. Where are the legal ramifications? I mean, where are the criminal charges? I believe that you could make a criminal case against each one of those, right? So why wasn't it done? Or are we just engaging in hyperbole? And so many others in our community, really, like who? People within the media, people who, legislators or others who otherwise, police officers for that matter, who don't live up to their oath to uphold the Constitution, to uphold the idea that government exists to keep us free? Okay, just asking. And consistently disregard established ways of ensuring public safety. Man, if there was ever an Orwellian catch-all, that's the word, safety. Well, you know, we have to be very careful, and we have to plan this very carefully for the purpose of public safety. It's all about safety. The people of Boise, says the mayor, have had enough of his threats and intimidation. What's this we stuff, paleface? I mean, you're speaking for all the people of Boise, or just for the people in Boise who have been called on the carpet because Ammon or someone like him has been active enough to call you out when you step across the line? And this is the key right here. This is why we know it's not just a paperwork error. We do not wish to welcome, actually, they do not wish to welcome someone with Mr. Bundy's track record into the heart of our community. So the mayor's going to, withdraw the welcome mat. You're not welcome in our community. I don't know if legally you can do that. I mean, can you trespass him from the whole community? Now, the city defines a special event as a gathering that requires extensive planning. Yes, bureaucracy usually does require extensive planning to, make sure it fully insinuates itself on everybody. That's according to the city's website. A permit is required for such events if they're expected to draw more than 1,000 people, or if they require extraordinary resources, including but not limited to alcohol compliance, security, emergency services, and road closures, and traffic control. In other words, give us something and we will complicate it, and for a fee, we might let you do it. And that's the key. If you pay the money and you beg for our permission, all of these things will be okay. But without it, why, it's just far too dangerous. I'm sorry, but that's melodrama. That's people trying to remind us why they need us. And it's not so far off from a kind of social credit score, where if you're not this ideologically pure, you may not be admitted to a particular event or welcome in a particular community. In fact, to illustrate what this looks like, I want you to check out this short clip of New York's governor talking about how they like to go back and look at people's social media accounts to make sure that they're dealing with someone of sufficient ideological purity. Check this out.
Not how we're doing it in New York anymore. We also talked about, I mentioned social media a number of times. I've called upon and working closely with our Attorney General to identify what's going on in social media. Those questions are now part of our background checks. Just like in the old days, you'd talk to someone's neighbor. Now you can talk to their neighbors online and find out whether or not this person has been spouting philosophies that indicate that they have been radicalized, and that's how we protect our citizens as well.
Okay, so anybody who is spouting rhetoric that is not in line or is not bending a knee to whoever's in power at the moment, we can presume has been radicalized. But where does it lead? Well, here's one possibility. Having your social media account suspended because your post violated community standards is just a taste of what a social credit system brings. For now, it's social media, then it's your money and access to amenities, but it's about social control. And I'm just going to suggest, put this out there, you don't have to agree, that what we're seeing here on the part of the Boise mayor is exercising some of that social control about someone who is consistently calling elected leaders and people in authority on the carpet when they overstep their bounds. Now, I get it. Not everybody likes Ammon. Not everybody agrees with Ammon. But I think this is a good example of leadership. Whether you agree with him or not, you can agree that the guy has skin in the game. So a couple of thoughts I'd like you to consider. When faced with the choice of compromising his values or separating himself from mainstream society, an authentic leader has the courage of conviction to step away from the crowd. That's the essence of leadership. It's using your influence as wisely as possible wherever you happen to find yourself at the moment. Now, one of the key indicators that you're dealing with a superficial kind of leadership is when the person in question has something to prove, Mayor. Whether it's winning every argument on the internet or bending a nation to his will, the ego-driven leader is consumed with keeping up appearances. They simply must win whatever discussion they're a part of. They have an almost pathological need to be seen as better, smarter, or more capable than others. I would also say more inclusive than others. Mere disagreement is treated as an affront. And finally, authentic leaders have enough conviction in their values to accept that they may be misunderstood, they may be misrepresented, or they may be maligned. Yet they'll still do what they believe is right because they've already won the toughest battle, the one with themselves. Once they've apprehended the truth as best they can, they share it without regard to what others may think of them. And I share that with you just because you need to choose carefully which leaders deserve your attention. So I'm not saying Ammon Bundy needs to be your leader, but I'm saying cut the guy enough slack to recognize at least he has some skin in the game. At least he is boldly standing for something where very few others will. And I personally believe the day will come when people are going to recognize what a debt of gratitude they owe not only to Ammon, but to other people like him, who they strongly disagreed with, because there was no polite way to stand up and reclaim those freedoms that are being wrested from us at every turn. Well, there you have it. Stop violating me with your different opinions. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy.